This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 2022's Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, directed by Ryan Coogler. And you might be asking, why is it taking 2 weeks to do this review? That's because I actually saw this movie last week, but it was so impactful, I thought, that I needed to see it again. So I caught it again the following week. And that being said, this is a great movie. And it's worth mentioning, I didn't like the first Black Panther. I thought it was fine, it had great moments, but as a movie, it didn't quite gel for me. Never mind that the story was essentially Iron Man, pardon me saying, in blackface. It just wasn't interesting enough to draw me in. I didn't hate it, I didn't like it either. This movie, I enjoyed immensely, partially because it made me feel something. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but movies that make me feel something, even if it's something I don't particularly enjoy feeling, like boredom, is interesting on some level. It's better, by my reckoning, than feeling nothing at all, than just sitting and letting something wash over you and not caring. So, Black Panther Wakanda Forever made me feel something, and that I love about it. Though beyond that, it made me feel sad in some ways. I enjoyed what I was seeing, but as opposed to, let's say, doing a James Bond, which is to say, replacing whomever would have played him if the current actor had left the role, they acknowledged the death of a character. And that's unusual in movies, frankly, and especially in a comic book-based movie. That is really odd and interesting, and the whole movie revolves around the acknowledgement of the death of Chadwick Boseman. That's pretty interesting. Though that being said, it's a wonderful movie, by my reckoning, far superior to the original, and you should see it for that reason alone. Though this review is less a review than a rant, because oftentimes, particularly in reference to Marvel movies, you get a lot of, oh, they're all the same, blah, 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 which is bullshit, particularly with Marvel Studios. And it's just lazy. Lazy thinking for weak minds. And it's lazy because, for instance, in the case of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, it's a geopolitical story with superheroes, which is to say you have potentially nations warring against each other. It's a geopolitical story, and in any other context, people would be pretty amazed by it, frankly, because it's a very well-told story. But because it's Marvel Studios, they have to make excuses for it. They can't enjoy it on what it presents. Instead, they have to go, well, it's a Marvel movie, they're all the same. Once again, it's bullshit. Typically, Marvel movies are not the same. Each movie is different, and they do revolve around similar subject matter oftentimes, because frankly, superheroes. They're going to be people flying and doing ridiculous things that normal people can't do. This does not invalidate the movie itself. And they oftentimes tell a story that is far more interesting than a lot of people give them credit for. For instance, Captain America, the Winter Soldier, was a political theory. Have you seen Day of the Jackal? Captain America, the Winter Soldier is similar to that, but with superheroes. Black Panther Wakanda Forever is a geopolitical story. The International, well, that's dealing with banking, but you see what I'm saying here. It's just that Marvel movies have the commonality of revolving around superheroes. but thematically they involve different types of themes and ideas. And I'm just kind of tired of the lazy thinking we get from people who watch these movies or don't even watch them because Marvel Studios. By way of illustration, Westerns are essentially all the same in the sense that they revolve around certain things. They take place in a certain period of time. They have horses. They have people with, well, I was about to say they have people with guns, but in the United States at any rate, that's such a commonality that applies to virtually any decade in this country's history. They have people with white hats and people with black hats. There are things that Westerns have in common, but not all Westerns are the same. For instance, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, or The Searchers, I believe that's John Ford. Those are awesome movies, and you cannot tell me that they are the same as every other Western. You cannot tell me John Ford is the same as, I don't know, whomever directed an episode of Bonanza. They are not the same thing. And the same logic applies for Marvel Studios, which is to say they're trying to use the superhero genre to tell different types of stories. Of course, it looks familiar. There's very little that's new under the sun. We need to accept that premise right now because it's just fact. But interesting filmmakers take what you know and subvert it slightly, make it slightly more engaging and different than you perhaps might have expected at first glance. And this is what Marvel Studios is doing. And that's what Black Panther has done. As I said initially, this is the first Marvel movie in theaters I saw a second time. I don't tend to do that, but this movie had me all in my feels, and I immensely enjoyed it. And looking at some of the reviews online of Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, some reviews say that it runs long. It's at 2 hours and change. I don't think it did. I think it actually proceeded pretty well and flowed. Though when people say that, they tend to cite the scenes with Everett Ross, played by, I want to say Morgan Freeman, but that is not his name. His last name is Freeman, but his first name is certainly not Morgan. In any case, I actually didn't mind those scenes. Though I think some time could have been cut from when Shuri and Okoye go to the United States. That could have been cut to some extent. The scene needed to be there, but as it played out, it was a little long and a little unnecessary, and I think the movie would have proceeded better without it. Well, the scenes with Martin Freeman, I think, were necessary to better establish what the United States was doing behind the scenes. And that was interesting to me. The whole car chase scene, not so much. It struck me as if we were watching Blade Trinity, the worst of the Blade movies, all over again, which also had a car chase scene which was not entirely necessary. In any case, if you're not familiar with the story, Wakanda Forever revolves around Wakanda, which seems obvious, and the United States and France working to get vibranium, hard to pronounce that word, of their own, so that Wakanda would be somewhat neutralized as a threat, because with vibranium, they have capabilities beyond those of either of those countries. And the Wakandans, particularly the Dora Milaje, are able to stop the mercenaries and present them to the United Nations, which embarrasses the United States. That's why the Everett Ross scenes are so important. It establishes a motivation for the United States, which will probably carry forward in other movies in terms of what we do as a country. So the star of this movie in some ways is Tina Huerta. as Namor. And his portrayal is so comic accurate. And I know what you might be saying. He looks nothing like, well, that's actually not true, but he doesn't look terribly similar to the comic version of Namor. And that's something someone who doesn't read the comics or understand them would say, because he is exactly like Namor. If you're familiar with Marvel Comics' Namor the Submariner, how he looks is relatively unimportant. What makes Namor Namor is his attitude, because frankly the character is a dick, and he's always been a bit of a dick. But that's part of his nature. He's very strong-willed, extremely powerful, and determined to protect his people at all costs. This is Namor. It is virtually irrelevant how he looks. That is Namor. That Marvel, in their movies, gave him an origin that differed from that in the comics is virtually irrelevant, because in the comics, Namor was fairly bland. When you take away his motivation, when you take away his attitude, when you take away his dickishness, Namor as a character was fairly bland in terms of Atlantis, in terms of how he came to be who he is. It never really was a big deal in the comics. In the movie, they played it up, they made it more interesting, they made it more engaging, and I'm not Latino, but I imagine a Latino person seeing this movie would be feeling pride, the like which they have probably never encountered before on screen, because his performance was remarkable. He was interesting, he was formidable, and this is a bit of an aside, but Huerta, physically speaking, is well built. He's just not like, I don't know, the guy who plays Thor, physically speaking. He has a very well-defined build, but he's not overly muscular. And that's okay, because not everyone is overly muscular. And if he were overly defined, I think that would actually do the character a disservice, because he doesn't need to be. His power stems from his abilities, his attitude. His looks are virtually irrelevant. And Marvel just did excellently with this. And I forgot to mention his attitude and his ankle wings. Now, keep in mind, ankle wings are somewhat dumb. Think about it for a second. The wings couldn't be any more than, I don't know, that long. There's no way on earth they're going to propel a person's body through the air. Never mind at particularly high speeds. But keep in mind, this is not reality. They're fucking superheroes flying around and throwing shields and aliens with hammers. The idea that you have a mutant, the first introduction of a mutant in an MCU movie, by the way, with wings on his ankles, it's like you shrug, because it doesn't matter. The point being, it works. It works visually, and it's very interesting, though it's perhaps most importantly faithful to Namor. If you're not a fan of Marvel Studios movies, I don't know what to tell you. You need to get over that, because they're doing some of the most interesting things in the theatrical space, bar none, that just happen to have superheroes. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like or a follow.